What is up, everybody? Today we're going to be building what you just saw, an epic fiery reveal burning text out of stone. And it can be anything besides text. It can be a logo, it can be an illustration file, whatever you like. And you can update the text after this is all built and it'll change instantly. Everything's modular. And we're working in Cinema 4D with the amazing Redshift render engine. Let's get into it. First, we will set our render engine to Redshift and the width to 1920, height 1080, and everything else is good. Let's uncheck save for now. So we'll create a cube. Size X, we'll set that to 4500. We'll set Y to 300, and we'll set Z to 4500. Segments in X, we'll set that to 10, and Z segments to 10. And let's change the display mode to lines so we can see what the geometry is doing. There we go. And now we will make the cube editable so we can UV map it. So we'll go to UV mode and select polygon mode, click on a polygon, and then Control A, select all, and click UV unwrap. There we go. Looks good. Go back into standard view and we will create a Redshift material. And we'll go ahead and drop that material onto our cube. Open that material up in the node editor. And let's add a texture node and a color correct node. And now let's control click drag and duplicate the texture node. And we'll load in a bump map node. Connect the texture to the bump map and the bump map to the bump map channel of the material. Looking good. All right, let's load in our textures. So we'll select this texture node first for the color channel. Open up the side panel. We're on the general tab by default where we'll find the path for our texture. And you can find these textures in the video description for download. Then let's load the cracked concrete texture into the color channel. And let's change the remap of the UVs to 3 and 3, which will scale down and tile our texture so we have more detail to work with. And next we'll load in our bump map texture, which is the cracked concrete wall displace, and we'll change the remap scale to 3 by 3 to match what we set for our color channel. All right, now let's add some lights. Let's go to Redshift, lights, and area light. We'll do a 2 light setup for this scene, and we'll move this into the bottom corner right here. And let's go ahead and change the color of this light to a blue. And then control click drag the light to duplicate it and move it in the opposite top corner. Rotate it to face the center of our scene. And let's change the color of this one to an orange. Now let's open up the render view and we'll check out what this is looking like. So we'll scale it up. We'll do fit to window, push play. Okay, so we have our texture on, our bump map, which we really can't see yet. So let's bring out the detail. Let's select our bump map node and we'll set the height scale to 3. We're starting to see a little bit of something. There we go, 20. And we see some protrusion happening. Looks okay. Let's move the light up a little bit. And let's widen this light so it's covering more of an area. And we'll do the same thing for the blue light as well. Now let's go back into our material and you know what, let's give the bump a little bit more. So select that, open up the side panel and change it from 20 Let's go 35. 50. Looks good. And let's go into the color correct node of our color channel, and let's dial in the gamma and contrast for more of a dramatic look. Something like this. Okay. And let's go into the material. Right now it's way too glossy, so let's set the roughness up a little bit more. And now we can see it's looking more like rock or stone. And let's rename this material Surface Boole, because what we're going to be doing is booling the text out of this rock surface. All right, we're ready to set up our text. So let's go ahead and delete the material off of our cube for now, just so we can see what's happening with our booled text. We'll go Shift C for the commander, type in text, and find our 3D MoGraph text. Okay, and change this to anything you want. For the tutorial, I'm using Armageddon. All right, let's set align to middle so it's center justified. Let's rotate it 90 degrees so it's laying on its back, and bring it up so we can see what's happening. There we go. All right, we're gonna scale it up a little bit. So select the text layer. Let's set the depth to 30. Subdivision is okay. Height, let's go to 20. And we'll set the text down into the stone. And we'll make sure that the top face of the text is just above the top face of our stone cube, because we are going to bool this. So let's go up and select Boole object, and we will load in the cube and the text into this bool. Drag the cube down, grab the text, and let's switch the order so the cube is on top, the text is on the bottom underneath the bool. And there we go. All right, we can see that the text is being booled out of the cube, and that's exactly what we want. And let's check it out in the render view and see what it's looking like. Now we'll grab our material, throw it back on to the cube. So we have our rock texture back in place with our bool text going on. And let's select the bool object. We'll go down and select create single object, and that just keeps it clean, all as one object. Select text, and we'll change it to bold, which that looks better. So let's zoom in and check out the edges. As you can see, there's some hard edges. We don't want that. We want more of a beveled look. So what we'll do is we'll go into the material, and what we're going to do is add a round corners node and mix that with the current bump map that we have in place. So let's add a color mix node. And we are simply going to plug the round corners node into input 1 of the color mix node, and our original bump map of the rock texture into input 2. And then reconnect our bump map to the material. Nothing happens because what we have to do is dial in our mix amount. By default, it's mixed on 100% of input 1, so we have to find a happy medium somewhere in between. Okay, let's change the radius to 3. That's closer. And the mix amount, Let's try 0.128. And you can see that those corners, those edges are catching light now. Now let's select the round corners node, bump up the samples to 50. We'll select our bump map and change the height scale to 500. There we go. Now we have our bump map and our rock texture and the round corners working together. All right, we're going to adjust the light a little bit, just so now we can see how that light is playing off the corners and the edges. And we'll dial in the lighting a little bit further. And now the next step, we're going to set up a reveal cube. And this is going to wipe on the booled text. So duplicate the cube, bring it down, and then let's go to the Y coordinate and bring it up 1 centimeter. So it's just above the booled text cube. And let's see what it's looking like. Of course, we are covering up our booled text, which is what we want for this cube. When we hide it, we can see the booled text underneath. So let's go into the material, duplicate this material, and let's rename it Surface Reveal. Now add this Surface Reveal material to our Reveal cube. So we'll go into this material and let's make some room for a new node. We're going to be adding a Vertex attribute node. And we'll plug this into the opacity channel, and this is what's going to allow us to wipe on and off this Surface Reveal cube using a field. So the next step is we need to add a Vertex attribute tag to this cube. So go down to other tags and we see, there we go, Vertex map tag. Select that tag, go down to where it says name, type in linear field underscore bool wipe. And let's open back up our material, select our Vertex attribute node, and where it says attribute name, we're going to select our tag, drag it and drop it into the name. So now this material is connected to that tag. And now we set up the field to wipe on and off the reveal cube. So check use fields, delete the freeze that's there by default. Now select linear field. And what we see automatically is a linear field in place, and half of the field is revealing the text and the other half of the field is concealing the text. And as we move the field along, it wipes on and off the text. This is exactly what we want, but we have to tweak it and dial in some settings. All right, so what we want to do now is add a subdivision surface, throw the cube under that, and that looks good. Increase the resolution of this cube, and this way that the field has more geometry to see and work with. Think of it as like a resolution. The higher resolution your geometry is, the more accurate your field will be. Now let's select the text and duplicate that, bring it down to the bottom, and rename it Text Glow. And we'll create a new Redshift material. Rename this Text Glow. And go into this material and let's add an incandescent material and plug this into the color channel. Now let's dial in the incandescent settings. Let's set the intensity to 400. Let's change the color to an orange, like a hot glowing orange. And let's apply this material to our Text Glow text. And now with the Text Glow selected, let's go down to subdivision and change that to 5. And let's add a camera so we can actually see the lens effects of the glow. So we'll turn on our camera, go into lens effect settings, and we'll check bloom, flare, and streak all to override. And let's dial in these settings, something like that. And you guys can play with this and get it the way you want it. Just takes a little bit of tweaking the settings. There we go, that's looking good. Now let's go into the text glow material and we'll add a vertex attribute. We'll plug that into the opacity channel. And just like before, let's add a vertex map tag to the text glow. Make sure that tag is selected. And then we'll rename it text glow wipe off. And now select your vertex attribute node, go into name, drag your tag into the name, and now it's connected. But it disappears because we need a field to be able to control the reveal. So let's set up the field, and we'll use a linear field. And there we go. Right away we can see the field working. Let's go down under contour mode and change it to curve so it's more of a gradual fall off. All right, and now you can rescale and position your field so that it's creating a glow on about 3 letters at a time. All right, now we're going to add a control null, and we'll rename it null master control. We're going to control all of our fields with this one null. Let's rename this field bool text reveal and drop it under our null. And we'll rename this field text glow reveal. And we'll move this up and drop it under the null. So now what we have in place is a control system using the null that wipes both fields across the text, revealing the bool and revealing the glow text all in one move. All right, now let's select the text glow, duplicate it, and rename this text glow secondary. And the reason for this is we just want a little bit of additional glow, more of like a fall off. We'll delete the vertex map tag, we won't need that. Let's duplicate the text glow material, name it text glow secondary, and replace the current material with that material. Let's open up our new material. Let's delete the vertex attribute node. We won't need that. And now let's refresh our render view, and we see that we have text glowing across all of the letters. And let's drop this text down into the pit of the booled text. And let's actually open this material back up and remove the incandescent node, because what we'll do is change this material to emissive. And we go down to the emission, we'll set that to 25. We'll color it an orangish, like a hot orange. And now we'll dial in our camera a little bit, our bloom. Now let's open up our first text glow material, and let's actually set the emission to 30, because we want this primary text glow to be hotter than the secondary. And we'll change this to orange as well. So this has both the incandescent glow and the emission happening. Let's go back into our secondary glow, and let's just take it down to 20. So our primary glow is hotter and our secondary glow is less. And now let's grab our master control null, wipe across, and let's see what's happening. And as you can see, as you wipe all the way across, the primary glow disappears and you're left with that simmering secondary glow. So now that we have the glow set up, let's change the font. And you can change this to anything you want. I'm going to go with Book Antiqua. Get those serifs on there. All right, now we're ready to set up the particle system. And the idea behind this is as the text is burned into the stone, particles will fly out of the scorched stone and wipe across the screen. So the first thing we need to do to set this up, let's grab the text layer under our bool, control click and drag, duplicate it, and let's rename it text particles. And we'll create a matrix object, set it to object mode. Now select the text particles layer, and we're going to add a connect. Now let's put the text particles under the connect, and then let's place our connect into the object field of our matrix. All right, and right away we can see some particles being generated. Let's crank up the count to 500 so we can see what's happening. You know what? Let's set it to 100,000. And now we have all of the letters filled with matrix particles. The next step is creating a destination object. And this object is going to tell the particles where to go. So let's create a sphere. Now let's duplicate our matrix object. And let's place our sphere in the object field of this new matrix object. And now you'll see that the sphere is filled with matrix particles as well. And we'll move the sphere off to the right. And now we're going to add an inheritance object. And this is simply what connects the matrix particles in the text with the destination matrix particles of the sphere. So let's drag the inheritance down to the bottom. Let's rename our first matrix matrix source, and our second matrix matrix destination. And now select inheritance, and then let's drag our matrix destination down into the object field of our inheritance. And make sure morph motion object is checked on for both matrix objects. And now select the matrix source, and we'll drag the inheritance down into the effectors field of our matrix source. And now if we go to the inheritance and under the effector tab, we'll change the strength from 100 and we'll move it down, and you'll see the text matrix particles are connected with the sphere. And now we can control the flow of the particles from the text to the sphere with this strength value. And we can go ahead and turn off the viewport and render visibility for the matrix destination. We won't need those on. But what we want to be able to do is control this movement of particles with a field, like we're controlling everything else with fields, connected under our master control null. So let's go under the fields tab, and we'll create another linear field. And right away you see a field appears and it's working. It's wiping the particles out of the text and transferring them into the sphere. But right now it's wiping backwards, so let's go down under direction and change it to -x. And this is the direction of particle wipe that we want. And we want to smooth out this transition a little bit, so let's go under remapping. Under contour, let's change it to curve. And now we're going to add our linear field for our inheritance that we just created under the master control null. And let's rename this field particle wipe. So now when we move our master control null, we're controlling the bool text reveal, the text glow reveal, and the particles all in one move. So let's open up our render view and see what this is looking like. The first thing we see is our text particle layer is blocking the glow that we should be seeing. So let's go ahead and turn off the text particle layer, because that's being used by the connect, which is inside of the matrix object generating the particles. So we don't actually need the text particles layer turned on. So now we can see our glow text, but you might be asking yourself, where the heck are the particles? I can see them in the viewport, but they're not here in the render view. That's because we have to add a Redshift object tag in order for Redshift to see and generate the particles. Okay, go to matrix source, add a Redshift object tag, and under the particles tab, we'll select optimized spheres. Set the scale multiplier to 2. And as you can see, we now have visible Redshift materials showing in the render view. Now they're going to look kind of stringy, and we're going to dial in the flow soon. But first, let's move the particles down into the rock, just below the surface. So select the text particles layer and move them down enough so that they're not popping through the rock surface. And now, when we move our master control, it's revealing the particles as they're burned out of the stone. Now we can go ahead and hide our destination sphere and then move it up under the master control null. So as the null moves, the particle wipe, the destination sphere moves with it, keeping the sphere out of frame. Now we'll refine the look of the particles. Select the matrix source, and with it selected, we'll add a random effector. And you'll see the random effector show up in the effectors tab. And now what we want to do is move the random up on top of the inheritance. And we're doing this because the stack order affects the way effectors work together. Now let's set the strength to 400% and the random mode to turbulence. Now we have some funky stuff going on here, but we'll continue to dial this in. Set the animation speed to 20% and the scale to 50%. Under the parameter tab, set the position X, Y, and Z coordinates to 100 centimeters. Turn rotation on and set each value to 360. Under fields, we're going to add a linear field. And as we move the field through the particles, notice how it's creating a fall-off ramp, affecting the particle flow and the random noise. And we'll move our field somewhere so that it looks as if the particles are gradually being pulled up and out. And we actually want to switch the direction of this linear field to -X. So on the linear field, under remapping, change the contour to curve just so it's smoothed out a bit. Now we'll grab our linear field and move it up under our master control null. Rename it matrix source random. Now select the matrix source again and change the count to 300,000. And it's important to note that whatever value we have the source count set to, we also need the destination count to match that same number. So go to the destination count and we'll set that to 300,000 as well. Now we have a good amount of particles going on. It's looking better, but we need to add a random noise effector to the destination matrix as well to give the particles more of a wavy flow. So with the matrix destination selected, under MoGraph, effector, select random and move it up under the matrix destination. Select the random effector and under the effector tab, change the noise to turbulence. Set the animation speed to 10% and under parameter, change the position values to 100 and the rotation to 360. Now it's closer, but we still want to widen the particle flow a little bit. So select our destination sphere and let's scale it up a bit. Also, if your viewport is laggy, you can just reduce the amount of particles for now so it's easier to work. Now let's crank up the particles to 400,000. And let's check out what's happening when we move the master control. Okay, now let's select the particle wipe field and we're going to rotate it a little bit so it's not so flat and vertical. There we go. And under remapping, go down to the curve we set and move the first control handle in a bit like so. This is for a more gradual move at the beginning of the particle flow. Now select the matrix source random field and move it over to the left so there's not as much noise right out of the gate. Let's actually move the matrix source random a little bit further to the left. And sometimes the particles won't appear correctly and they'll just need refreshed by checking off and on the matrix source. There we go. Looking pretty cool. Now let's add a light to shine onto the particles. Go to Redshift, Light, Area Light, and move it into position like so. We'll want to angle it so it's right above the text and beaming down onto the particles. So with the light selected, go to the Project tab and change the mode to Include. Now drag the matrix source in. And what we're doing is we're telling the light only to include the matrix source particles in its illumination or projection. Okay, let's get the light color dialed in now. Something like a burnt orange. Now change the intensity to something like 300. Now let's crank back up the particle count to 400,000. I'd still like to disperse the particles a little bit as they flow out. So select the random under matrix destination and set the strength to 300. Nice. Okay, now let's rename the light particles, and we'll place it under our master control as it has to move along with everything else. Next up is refining the look of our particles for close-ups, because if you zoom in, you'll see there's just a bunch of plain spheres, and plain is just not what we're going for here. So we're going to create a sample particle that the rest of the particles will be generated from. Turn off the matrix source for now, and we'll choose a platonic object. And I'm going to speed through this reshaping process, but you can reshape it in any kind of a generic rock shape that you like. Now scale it down and move it under the matrix source. Turn on the matrix source. Open the render view. Select the Redshift object tag, and under particles, change the particle type to custom object and drag the platonic object down in. Scale it down to 0.3. And with the platonic object selected, go ahead and move it down underneath the surface of the rock. So it's hidden because we don't need to see it, but we need to have it on. Under the matrix source, object tab, turn on enable scaling and set the scale to 25%. This will give us some variation in the scale of the particles. And now it's time for fire. So we'll be using Pyro, which is built into C4D, to create the flames that will burn out of the letters as they're revealed. The first step is to turn off the particle flow for now, because that'll just slow us down. Change the display to quick shading lines. Now grab the text particles layer, duplicate it, and rename it Text Pyro. Move this text layer out from the surface, and we'll rescale it to be nearly flat. Then set it back down into the text holes, just at the base of the bottom of the text. We'll now set this text as our Pyro object that the flames will be generated from. Right-click on the text, and under Simulation Tags, select Pyro Emitter. Notice that the Pyro tag appeared, and a Pyro output layer was generated. Under the Pyro output, Pyro Scene, in the Pyro tab, change the tree settings to 1. Under combustion, change fuel burning rate to 50. And under dissipation, change relative density dissipation to 1%. Now select the Pyro tag, set the density add to 4. Set the temperature to 10,000. Temp add to 0. Velocity strength to 200. Under noise, set the scale to 300%. And now let's heat things up. Make sure the timeline is set to 0 and push play. Let's check out what's happening in the render view. So no fire in the render view. This is because in order for Redshift to render Pyro output, we have to add a Redshift volume material. And let's do that now. Under Create, Redshift, Materials, select a Pyro volume. Now drop that Pyro volume onto the Pyro output. Now if we open the render view back up and reset the Pyro output, Boom, we got the heat. But it's looking way too blown out. And the way we adjust the look of the flames and the smoke is we'll go into the pyro volume material. Inside this volume material, it always takes some fiddling with to get the desired result. But here are the values that worked for me. Set the scatter coefficient to 0.1, the absorption to 0.7, and the color of the white value to an orangish here. Set the emission to 0.05, and you should be getting a result that looks similar to this. Now, we don't want the fire to explode out all at once. We need to control it. So it only comes out of the letter holes as they're burned into the stone and everything else wipes across. To do that, we use a destructor object. Now, on this destructor object, change the size to 1800, 200, and 300 so it fits the text. And these values might be different depending on what text you've typed in. And place it over the text and down into the stone. And the destructor object needs to be just under the surface of the stone. Under the Pyro output, Pyro scene, and the Pyro tab, scroll all the way down to Forces. Switch to Include and add our destructor in there. Now grab the destructor and place it under the master control null because it needs to move with everything else. Change the frame range to 400. Now set a keyframe at frame 0 with the master control null moved all the way to the left. And make sure auto keyframe is turned on. Move the timeline slider to frame 300. And we'll open up the render view. Now move the master control all the way to the right and turn off the render switch on the text Pyro layer. So now we've set up keyframes on this master control that animate it all the way across the length of the text, revealing the text, the particles, and the fire, the whole shebang. And the destructor object is moving along with it all, wiping on the fire. All right, so we don't want the flames burning straight up without any turbulence or movement, so we need to add some wind. Under Simulate, add a wind effector. And move it to the left side of the text and rotate it so that the wind direction arrow points to the right. Now select the Pyro output and under Forces, drop the wind mod. Under the Scene tab, we should see the following. Now let's dial in the wind. Set the wind speed to 175, turbulence to 10%, turbulence scale to 100%, and the mode to force. Now, if you notice things are moving too slow in the viewport, turn off the matrix destination and the inheritance for now so we can preview the motion of the flames in the viewport. Now let's take a look in the render view. And now we're going to add some keyframes to control the strength of the fire over time. We want the fire to burn hot at first at the beginning of the animation and then taper off into a smoky smolder after the full text is revealed. So with the Pyro tag selected at frame 240, add a keyframe on temperature set. Then at frame 300, change it to 3000. So between this frame range, the fire simmers and calms down towards the end of the animation, and this is mainly so the text can be legible and there's not so much fire pluming up right into the camera lens. And you know what? Let's tone down the wind speed towards the end of the animation as well. On frame 250, I've set a key under wind speed at 175, and on frame 290 at 25. Now let's look at the fire and the particles working together. Make sure both matrix objects are turned back on, as well as the inheritance. Start at frame 0 and let it play through the simulation frame by frame until we start to see some particles. Now open up the render view and we'll check it out. All right, guys, it's almost there. Now let's get some texture on the particles so they're not just plain white. To do this, we're going to duplicate the surface Boole material, rename it particles, open the material up, and delete everything except for what's plugged into the color channel. Now drop this material onto the matrix source. And now we'll see the texture is applied to the particles, but it's looking a bit dark. So we'll open up the particle material and under the color correct node, play with the gamma and the contrast until you get a desired look. That's looking pretty good. We're almost there. Now it's just a matter of tweaking settings to your preference. I'd like to add a little more light on the particles, so let's crank that light up to 400. And I'll turn down the particle size a bit to something like 0.23. Let's make sure our camera is leveled out. And, feel free to angle the camera however you wish. Now that everything is set and you're digging the look of the particles and the fire, it's time to cache the Pyro simulation. And what this does is it turns this simulation into a volume or a VDB sequence. And what this VDB sequence does is it locks in the look of the simulation we built, and Pyro doesn't have to simulate it during our render. It'll simply read the VDB cache files, which is a more stable way of rendering Pyro outputs. So let's get it cached. And before we cache the files, we want to turn off the matrix source, the matrix destination, and the inheritance, because leaving these on would slow everything down. Under Pyro output and the cache tab, click Cache Scene. Choose a file path destination for the VDB files to be created. I just like to make a folder named Pyro Cache, and you can name this VDB sequence whatever you like. Once you click Save, the simulation will automatically begin caching. Now, these VDB files generated can become massive, so make sure you have enough space freed up. I never let my C drive go lower than 100 gigabytes, just in case. Once the cache is complete, you can turn off the simulation objects since we don't need them on now that our cache is loaded. And now I'm going to animate my camera. You can do this however you like, at whatever angle or move looks best to you. But before I animate my camera, I'm going to turn off the particles so they're not slowing down the viewport playback. All right, this is the camera move I've set up. And the way we built this scene, the master null fully reveals the text at frame 300, and from 300 to frame 400, the camera settles into an overhead position as the text glows and smolders and the smoke calms down so the text is actually legible. Now I'm going to adjust the lights a little bit just to fill out more of the space by widening them out. And you can adjust the lighting in your scene however you like. And what I like to do is I like to also angle my fields a little bit so the Boole text is revealed at more of an angle and not just flat on vertical. And if you want more detail in the text reveal, you see it being wiped on and it looks kind of like a blocky, chunky movement. You can always increase the subdivision like so, and that will help get rid of the blockiness. It is time to render. Let's get the render settings dialed in. We will do 1920, 1080, 30 frames a second, frame range set to preview range. Check on save, format PNG, no alpha, no multipass.
Lilu Dallas multipass.
Sorry, Lilu. Select a destination path for the render sequence. Now, under the Redshift Advanced tab, set the sampling to something around 0.5. And if you're getting noise, typically in the shadow areas, you can lower this value or experiment with denoising. But I usually set my renders to 0.05 and everything looks pretty good. If you do experience noise, you can lower this value. The lower you go, the longer the render time takes, but the higher quality you will have. And it's time, guys. Go ahead and launch the render. And I always get warning messages on the first frame of the Pyro volume when rendering. I always just ignore it, and after the first frame, the warning stops. And that is it. This was a lot for my first tutorial, I know. Feel free to leave questions in the comments or send me a message. I'm happy to try to answer any questions that come through. There's much more to come, and I'm looking forward to showing you guys some more cool stuff in C4D. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell to stay tuned. Until next time.